Alrighty, so here we are, week 17, the last kind of video from me. I probably will do a week 17 or just one for the general announcements as well. So, what I want to do in this video is really just start with the thank you because I understand that as community college students or as students in general, you have choices about where you can spend your time. Now, sometimes classes like this, depending on if you're using it to meet a requirement, you may not have a lot of choices, but you did have choices. There were other classes you could have taken. So I hope this class has been something has been of a benefit to you and it has extended your knowledge of programming, specifically of JavaScript. That is obviously our goal here. And one of the things, that's why starting in week 10, right, I had the CRUD, the create, read, update, and delete application, the decision code are for you to work on from 10 all the way through until this will be the last week. You'll work on that. And the one thing I've noticed is there are some students that skip those and move on to like at week 10, they saw that assignment and they just couldn't go there. And the one cool thing about not one cool, there's actually a lot of cool things about Canvas, but one of the things about Canvas that's really nice, and I want you to know this. So you can go into grades, you can figure out if you didn't do those assignments, but you did everything else, where you would end up in your grade. So, FYI, but the idea of being able to code something on your own is really important. Being able to take a concept that you have. That's why I did a decision because often students tell me they don't know where to start, right? So I like to start with something you do all the time, something that impacts your life, a decision you make on a daily or weekly or very often basis. But this week we finished that up in week 17, right? So again, I'm not going to go over too much at the end of the semester because I'll do that on the video that I'll post probably later this week because actually I'm recording this in week 16. Okay. So here are the topics I want to talk about for now, which is there's several things I was hoping we got to, but there were several things we did that I'm really happy about. But there was one, regular expressions. So this is where leaning into the resources that are out on the web, and I'm going to show you ChatGPT's output of something in a minute and just walk you through A, what are they? B, how do you use them? Because regular expressions, regex, if you've heard that term, if you haven't, is a way to have a string search. It's a pattern. And what you do is you match, like you can have a large database entry, or you could have a validation where you want to do validation. Like I'm going to show you email validation using a regular expression, which is a great way to do it because if you didn't have a regular expression to use, you'd have to write all the code. Now, these regular expressions are not 100% oftentimes, and you'll see where in this case it does fall down a little bit, but for general purpose validation, like as an example, if you wanted to say, if somebody was creating a username, and you wanted that username to be only so long and have only, alphanumeric characters, um, alpha and some numeric or maybe special characters, you could write a regular expression for that. So if I move over to chat real quick, starting with what is it? And I recommend you do this as well, right? So, right. And this is what I was talking about, a sequence of characters that defines a search pattern. And so, very good. And this is the other thing. It's not tied to a language, so that whatever language you're programming in, you can use a regular expression. Now, the way you use it will vary. In other words, the code that you write to take advantage of it. I'm going to show you in HTML how you would do that. Okay, but here's one I asked for. And by the way, ChatGPT is not the only resource here. You can search for other websites that will help you create. And here's the example of a regular expression. And what I asked for was a regular expression for email address. So what's cool about this is it breaks it down and shows you from the beginning character, right? This anchors the expression at the beginning, ending of the string. And it matches on one or more characters of letters, digits, dots, underscores, right? So these are all the characters you could find within there. Has to have an at. We know that's true for an email, right? And then matches on one or hyphens for, okay, so it's just another, so we have to, the first part, the username, the email ad, the email name, and then the at, and then the dot, whatever that is, right? And then at the end. So this string is going to check based on the input to see if it matches this pattern. And so the way you can implement this, let me just bring up for a second here. I have VS Code open. And in VS Code, I was looking at my decision code I'd been working on. And let's just say I don't need it, but just if I did want the user to give me an email address, right? That could be the label. And then I could set an attribute called pattern. And then I could just copy and paste that regular expression so that then whatever the user enters into the input field will be checked against this string of a regular expression to see if it's valid. Now, required, obviously, we've seen as minimum validation. This is much better, much of a more realistic level of validation that you could use. So just doing that when somebody enters it will check to see if it's valid or not. So that's just one use of a regular expression. Knowing how to use them, way helpful in various contexts. So play around, go learn a little bit. And if nothing else now, if somebody mentions to you regular expressions, right? Hopefully you'll know what that means. So at this point, you should have already created a 0037 and just put a readme.md file. You don't have to put anything about the regular expressions, although you're welcome to. Okay, two topics I want to talk about. One is the use of the YouTube videos. One of the, I mean, this, stepping in like I've had to do and like you've had to adjust to, has been a challenge for me. As I mentioned early on, I normally use Udemy courses as a textbook equivalent for a coding class. And then I give what's called Learn Together assignments, and then we have code reviews. But walking into a class that had already been set up and the students were already used to a structure of A, not having a Udemy course, and B, not having code reviews, I had to really, rethink my approach to how I would teach it. And it's been actually really fun for me to record like most of the content. But here towards the end, I have used some YouTube video, and I'm kind of curious. And there's a couple of you have taken my courses before, and now you've experienced me creating a lot of the content. What's your feeling? And even if you haven't, what's your input about the use of the YouTube video stuff? Because where I have you code along and have you do different commits. I don't know. I'm just curious because I'm looking at how I'm going to handle that in the future. And I should have put as a related topic to, because I'll be teaching this in the fall 2023 semester, is the idea of a code review. So let's actually, and I'll modify this after I finish. So, give me some feedback on the video part. But now what I want to tell you is one of the things, and it kind of almost relates to the last topic too, is, luckily I know enough people who are actually professional developers and work in the professional environment. And one of the things, and I've been doing this for several years now as part of my course, is I require students to do a code review. So as an example, where you're doing like the app development for the CRUD app for the decision, I would have students 3 times a semester during that development cycle, right, is come in and actually have a code review where they bring in their code to a session with me, and I ask them questions or have them go over the code with me. And that process is one of the very few ways I feel I can validate students have actually learned JavaScript. And, but not having that option this semester because I didn't feel, again, it was fair to you all to put that as a new requirement when you didn't have it before from the beginning of the semester. Because for the most part, when I've done it with my previous students, most of them that got to this point in the semester were totally fine with it because they understood when they go into industry that these code reviews are going to be somewhat typical. And having an experience here gave them at least an insight of what that would look like, which was talking to somebody else about your code. But because you didn't have that in this class, I relied on commits. Your commits, right? This is why commits are so important to me in this class, is that's the way I see, you know, are you actually following along with the content that I'm creating and the code that I'm writing? And then there are points, as you saw, where I did code challenges, right? And then on those, the way I graded your commits, and this is something I think I'm going to continue to do, but I'm going to refine it a little bit, is the idea is even if you don't have to get working code, you just have to attempt it. And if you can't attempt it, at least tell me what you tried. Because it's real easy, and that's kind of my other thing, to just copy code. Right? It's really tempting, I think. That's why Chat GDP in some senses is a concern for those of us teaching coding, because when something else can write it for you, or the other tool, and by the way, I haven't even talked about this tool this semester, which is, maybe I have, but I don't remember it, is VS Code has something called Copilot. It's basically like a paired programmer, because of paired programming is a very common thing in the programming world where you're coding with another person and together you're learning and being more productive, it would be the hope. But now you, instead of, well, you still want to do that. You still want to have those experiences, but you can use GitHub Copilot as that pair programmer, right? So going back to my point though about copying code and the idea of this class not having code reviews, right? So first, hopefully now in your feedback, like, do you understand, maybe you have questions. Like, a code review is basically you coming into a session and being able to explain your code, answer questions about answer my questions about your code, right? As a way to validate your understanding of the code you're writing. First, can you write it and can you explain it? So, I'm kind of curious. I am curious about your feedback because we didn't do that. What I said is I rely on commits. And that brings me to the copying code. So, I just want to see some train of thought in your notes here that shows me you're paying attention and that you're answering, some of this feedback, because we're not setting in a classroom environment. This would be like the last session we would have, and we would just be having a discussion. But because we're not having that, although I am considering actually making this a discussion. Actually, I think I'm going to do that. Now that I've said it, it actually totally makes sense. So what I'm going to do is, in this case, right, I'm going to switch this from an assignment to a discussion. So you'll have to do your post and you'll have to do at least 3 replies to get all the points for this assignment. And you can pick up on any of the topics that I've mentioned here, right? Because where we're at now in the flow of concepts is copying code. Because one of the things I never said until I think it was week 9 when I said you could copy my code, I never actually showed you where my repo was that I remember, but some of you found it. And for that purpose, it was actually almost easy for some folks who were in a hurry because of not having deadlines in this class, which is another topic. But it was easy just to copy it. But it didn't help in this case, right? Because again, what do I look at? Commits. So I don't want to give the code out, but I also want to give students a reference so that when they're coding along, if their code doesn't work, they have something to look at. So it's a bit of a quandary for me as a coding instructor to say, how do I help you learn without enabling you? But given the new environment we're going to be in, how do I do that anyway? Because the reality is, even with AI, if you're going to go on to a technical field such as this, right, such as coding development or anything related, you're going to have to explain code to somebody, which means you need to understand it. Okay. Okay. So actually now I've added one last topic, which is the due dates for this class. One of the things that I've done, and again, those of you who have taken my class know this, is that I have due dates, and then if you miss the due date, you can still complete the item, but it's discounted. And the discount of generally 25% is really there to help you keep on track. Because I think as humans, right? I mean, this is true for me too. I have to self impose my own deadlines. Sometimes they're imposed for me. Often I have to impose them myself. But left without a deadline that either somebody else or myself applies, I would just procrastinate. And I think without that idea of a bit more structure, this is what I saw in this class, that there were a certain group of students that just got work done. And that's wonderful. That's what we hope for, right? So if you are, in that group that didn't and you struggled to get it done, the one thing I would tell you to work on is self-discipline, to where it's like, you just set yourself up to say, listen, I'm going to sit down and code today. Because here's the other reason this is important with a coding class, is that what happens is if you start coding and you're learning about variables, loops, functions, right? Some of those fundamental concepts. And then you take like 3 or 4 weeks because something happens, coming back from that is a real challenge. And even if, like for me, if I take more than 3 or 4 days, I notice I have a ramp up time. Now, it could just be I'm older and my brain, I think my brain actually does really well. Anyway, I won't go there. But regardless, I think, and I've seen this in other people as well, it just takes some time to get that muscle memory, that brain kind of thinking, because, coding is not a natural activity for humans in general. Okay, so I've talked about a lot of different topics. I started with a list of 3 and I ended up with like a list of 6, right? Regular expressions, the use of YouTube, the code reviews, copying code, and the due date. So in your reply, I would appreciate, right? Again, I'm going to switch this to a discussion. I would appreciate hearing some of your feedback if you feel comfortable giving it. Here, if you're not comfortable giving me that feedback here, reply just about general stuff and then email me directly in Canvas. The other option is rate your professor. I don't know how many of you use that, but rate your professor is another way for you to give feedback to future students about this class. Okay? Okay, I think that was all I had. Anyway, I guess where I'll end is where I started, which is thanks. I very much appreciate. I really hold dear the responsibility that I am vested with as an instructor for classes that I teach. I'm not saying I do it right. I know I miss the mark at times, and I have to just say I'm going to do it better next time. And this class has been a good way for me to stretch my own style. And I've learned a lot in this process as well. So I thank you for that. And I very much enjoyed getting to know a solid group of the students in here. And at week 17, I hope there are a few more that come through and complete this class. All right. Have a great one, and I'll talk to you soon.